I think she hates him.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Okay, so we can all agree on that. That's a given. I also think that she wants to take him out. She does not want to be the first lady anymore.
It started with a smirk, a coffee mug, and one of the most brutal takedowns aired on daytime television. On an ordinary morning of The View, Sunny Hostin delivered anything but ordinary commentary. Staring directly into the camera, she held up a View-branded mug and quipped, "You can have this for free, not to be confused with a mugshot, because that's your area." The crowd erupted. But the target of her sarcasm wasn't just any public figure. It was the former president of the United States. That single joke, sharp, effortless, and perfectly timed, summed up everything the Trump era had come to symbolize. Spectacle, scandal, and a presidency entangled in the legal system. The mugshot punchline wasn't simply comedy. It was commentary on the surreal truth that a former commander-in-chief had, in fact, posed for a real booking photo. That image, once unthinkable, was now etched into public memory, plastered across social media, parodied on t-shirts, even printed on flags at political rallies. In a country where perception often rivals policy, a photograph meant to document legal accountability had morphed into a cultural Rorschach test. For some, it was justice served. For others, it was martyrdom. Sunny knew exactly what she was doing. By drawing a straight line between Trump's mugshot and the branded merchandise of a daytime talk show, she collapsed the divide between political crisis and consumer culture. It was a reminder that in America, even disgrace can be monetized. Even infamy can be merchandised. And it landed hard because, for all of Trump's bravado and courtroom theatrics, that image, the mugshot, was one thing he couldn't spin, blame on the deep state, or turn into a win. It was raw, real, and irrefutable. When a moment like that becomes punchline material on live television, it signals something deeper, a shift in tone, a turning tide. The moment satire stops playing nice. But Sunny wasn't done. What began as a jab at Trump's legal troubles was about to turn personal. Because behind the courtroom headlines and defiant speeches, there was another story playing out, quieter, colder, and far more unsettling. One that didn't involve a judge or a jury, but a woman who'd shared the title of First Lady, and who now, it seemed, wanted nothing more to do with the man she married. For years, she stood beside him, often a step behind, sometimes a step apart, but always in the frame. And yet, as Donald Trump's legal battles mounted and his campaign rhetoric grew louder, one face faded quietly from view: Melania Trump. Sunny Hostin didn't need a leaked memo or an insider scoop to raise the question. The silence was loud enough. On The View, she laid it out in plain language. She doesn't want to sleep in the same room with him. She can't tolerate him. And she doesn't even like decorating the White House for Christmas. The audience laughed. But the truth hit deeper than comedy. The signs weren't subtle. During Trump's presidency, Melania was caught on tape saying, "Who gives a F*** about Christmas stuff?" She skipped public appearances. She avoided interviews. She swatted his hand away on runways. And even now, as Trump barrels toward another campaign, she remains almost entirely absent. No rallies, no interviews, no political statements. A first lady who once stood beside the most powerful man in the world now watches from the shadows. Or perhaps not at all. It's easy to overlook silence. But in politics, silence is rarely accidental. Melania's distance isn't just personal, political. Her absence strips Trump of one of his strongest visual cues: a stable family. And in a media landscape that thrives on optics, an empty frame speaks volumes. When a wife who once lived in the White House quietly retreats while her husband fights to return, it leaves voters wondering, what does she know that we don't? Maybe the lesson here is about presence. How showing up, or not showing up, can say more than any press release. Melania doesn't need to hold a press conference. Her silence is the message. Whether it's quiet protest or quiet pain, the result is the same. Trump stands more alone now than he ever has. And just when it seemed like Melania's absence couldn't speak any louder, she appeared, but not at a rally or by her husband's side. She appeared in a sleek, pre-recorded video promoting a memoir that sent a message louder than any campaign slogan. What she said next would set off alarms, not just in the media, but in Trump's own inner circle. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't call a press conference. But when Melania Trump released a polished video promoting her upcoming memoir, it carried a message that couldn't be ignored. Her words were calm, deliberate, and unmistakably pointed. Individual freedom is a fundamental principle that I safeguard. There is no room for compromise when it comes to this essential right that all women possess from birth. Too many. It sounded like a quiet declaration of independence. But to those listening closely, like Sunny Hostin, it was something far more provocative. In a political moment where Donald Trump proudly took credit for overturning Roe v. Wade, here was his wife publicly championing women's bodily autonomy. The contradiction wasn't just political, it was personal. This wasn't the first time Melania had charted her own course. She'd broken with Trump before refusing to move into the White House immediately after his inauguration, skipping the G7 spouses events, and even traveling separately from him at key moments. But this video felt different. It was produced, intentional, and released during a moment when women's rights were front and center in America's political debate. Sunny didn't speculate. She didn't need to. The tension was built right into the visuals. On one screen, Trump at rallies, bragging about reshaping the Supreme Court. On another, Melania Glamoros, sereni, speaking about freedom, choice, and values that sounded more in line with his opponents than with his platform. It was a split screen with a message, and maybe that's the lesson hiding in plain sight. Not all rebellions need fireworks. Sometimes, all it takes is timing and tone. In a world where every statement is dissected and every silence questioned, Melania's words carried weight not because they were loud, but because they stood in quiet contrast to everything her husband was selling. But if her subtle defiance stirred concern behind closed doors, it was only the beginning. Because while Melania's video floated above the political fray, Trump himself was still stuck in the mud, refusing to answer questions, dodging transparency, and turning even basic presidential expectations into battlegrounds. And Sunny was ready to call it out. There's a rhythm to American presidential politics. Candidates shake hands, give speeches, and without fail release their tax returns and medical records. It's not just tradition, it's a quiet contract with the public, a way of saying, you can trust me, I've got nothing to hide. But Donald Trump broke that rhythm and never looked back. Sunny Hostin brought it up with the kind of calm that makes the truth hit harder. He says every president provides their birth certificate, she said on The View, but do you know what they actually provide? Their taxes, their medical records? And Trump, well, he provided neither, despite years of requests. Court orders and media investigations, Trump refused to disclose even the basics. No clear look at his income, debts, business ties, or health. And every time someone asked, he brushed it off with another distraction, another grievance, another enemy to blame. What makes this more than just a paperwork issue is what it tells us about leadership. Trust isn't built on speeches, it's built on accountability. And when the highest office in the land becomes a hiding place for secrets, it changes what voters expect and what future leaders feel entitled to hide. The irony is hard to miss. For someone who branded himself as a deal maker, a billionaire, a man of strengths, so much remains in the dark. What deals were made, what money exchanged hands, what health risks were ignored, we still don't know. And maybe we never will. That's the quiet danger of normalizing secrecy, because the more the public accepts silence in place of answers, the easier it becomes for power to operate unchecked. But even as Trump stayed silent on his own affairs, he never stopped boasting about how much he had accomplished. And that gap between self-promotion and public accountability, between what he said and what he showed, was about to grow even wider. Because as Sunny soon revealed, Trump wasn't just refusing transparency, he was toying with the very foundation of the Constitution itself. 3 days. That's how long it took after Donald Trump's first inauguration before someone in his circle floated the idea of changing the Constitution so he could stay in office longer. Not after 4 years. Not after a re-election, just 3 days in. And already, the thought of a third term was on the table. Sunny Hostin didn't have to dig through conspiracy theories to find it. It was a documented resolution, introduced by a Republican lawmaker, proposing to amend the 22nd Amendment and let Trump run for a third time. The argument? That he would need more time to fully reverse the policies of his predecessors and finish what he started. Now, the 22nd Amendment has been clear for over 70 years. No president can be elected more than twice. It's a rule put in place after Franklin D. Roosevelt served 4 terms, meant to prevent too much power from resting in one person's hands for too long. But Trump has never been subtle about his ambitions. Over the years, he's joked more than once about serving 10, maybe 14 more years. At rallies, he's laughed with supporters, chanting for more years, and followed up with maybe 8. And even if some call it humor, the repetition starts to feel like testing the waters. What worries Sunyan, many others, isn't just the joke. It's how easily those lines blur. How quickly a suggestion becomes a headline, then a debate, then a strategy. Democracies don't break all at once. They erode one boundary at a time, and maybe that's what makes this part of the story so unsettling. It reveals a pattern, a man who doesn't just crave power, but one who seems allergic to limits. Whether it's constitutional term limits, judicial oversight, or media scrutiny, Trump doesn't push back against boundaries. He pretends they don't exist. The truth is, every president, no matter how popular or controversial, eventually steps down. That's the system. It's what separates the presidency from a throne. When that expectation is threatened, even in passing, it chips away at something bigger than politics. It challenges the very idea of peaceful transfer of power, and while Trump teased a third term, another storm was already brewing, because if his relationship with democracy looked shaky, his relationship with the economy was about to reveal even more cracks. And this time, the damage wouldn't just be political, it would hit straight to the wallets of everyday Americans. Donald Trump built his image around one central claim, that he was a brilliant businessman. From skyscrapers to steaks, from casinos to reality TV, He presented himself as the ultimate dealmaker, the man who could run America like a business. And for some voters, that promise sounded like exactly what the country needed. But Sunny Hostin saw through the branding. On The View, she peeled back the gloss to reveal what had always been hiding underneath: a trail of bankruptcies, broken deals, and bluster without results. It wasn't just one or two failures. Trump filed for bankruptcy protection 6 times. He lost money on a mortgage company, a travel agency, a vodka line, and 2 casinos, including the Trump Taj Mahal, once hailed as the 8th wonder of the world. His airline folded. His university got sued. His name, once a symbol of luxury, became attached to lawsuits and settlements. And when he brought that same swagger into the Oval Office, the cracks started showing again. Sunny highlighted how his terraform zest wishily with China sent shockwaves through the economy. Farmers lost overseas markets. American manufacturers faced rising costs. Global automakers like Toyota and Volkswagen shifted investment away from the U.S. and toward China's growing electric vehicle sector. Even U.S.-based plants began downsizing or shutting down altogether. Meanwhile, the stock market wobbled, and job numbers dropped. At one point, U.S. employers cut over 170,000 jobs in a single month, the worst February since the 2009 financial crisis. But instead of offering clear plans or reassurance, Trump downplayed the damage, blamed others, or changed the subject. The lesson here is sobering. Business success in the private sector doesn't always translate to public leadership. A president can't file for Chapter 11 when a country is in crisis. And a government doesn't run on image or instinct, it runs on planning, cooperation, and long-term thinking. But perhaps the most dangerous illusion wasn't in the numbers, it was in the belief that no one would notice, that as long as the speeches were loud enough, the slogans catchy enough, and the finger-pointing relentless, people wouldn't stop to ask, is this actually working? Sunny did ask, and she wasn't alone. Because as jobs disappeared and inflation crept in, the realities of Trump's economic choices were no longer confined to charts or forecasts. They were showing up in people's mailboxes in the form of missed rent notices, overdue bills, and grocery receipts that didn't stretch like they used to. Still, even that wasn't the end of it. Because while Trump battled headlines and hemorrhaging markets, he was quietly waging a war on something far more foundational, something that affects every home, every family, and every generation: America's education system. Sunny often says that education was her great equalizer, the bridge that took her from poverty to a place at the table. That's why, when she talks about attacks on the education system, it doesn't come from politics. It comes from something deeper, something personal. Under the Trump administration, education wasn't just underfunded. It was treated like a bargaining chip. Federal budgets proposed deep cuts to public school funding, special education programs, teacher training, and even nutritional support for students. But beyond the numbers, what alarmed Sunny most was the slow, strategic effort to reshape what students were allowed to learn. In state after state, conservative leaders pushed to censor history curriculums, lessons about slavery, civil rights, systemic racism, even the contributions of Black Americans all came under fire. Some textbooks were rewritten, others were banned entirely. And then came the ultimatums: teach a patriotic version of American history, or lose your funding. Sunny didn't mince words. She called it what it was: extortion. She shared how one of her closest friends, Alicia Garza, co-founder of the Black Lives Matter movement, watched her work and influence erased from classrooms overnight. It wasn't about protecting children, it was about protecting power. Because when you raise a generation without the tools to think critically, challenge injustice, or understand the past, you don't just dull their minds, you control their future. One Florida teacher shared anonymously how she was told to remove a book on Ruby Bridges from her shelf. Another school canceled a Black History Month presentation after parents complained. Across the country, teachers felt silenced, students felt confused, and classrooms once filled with open dialogue turned quiet. And that's the quiet damage Sunny kept warning about. When education is treated like a threat, when knowledge is labeled controversial, the cost isn't just academic, it's generational. Maybe that's the real lesson here. Freedom of thought is just as fragile as freedom of speech. And when leaders fear ideas more than ignorance, it's the children who pay the price. But even as schools were stripped of funding and truth, another crisis was unfolding, this time beyond the classroom, across borders, and in full view of the world. Because while America was censoring itself at home, Trump was burning bridges abroad, and the consequences would stretch far beyond textbooks. There was a time, not long ago, when American presidents stepped onto the global stage with a certain weight. Allies listened. Enemies took notice. The United States, for better or worse, was a steady hand in an unpredictable world. But during the Trump years, that hand became a fist, and the world responded by pulling away. Sunny Hostin broke it down with clarity and concern. On The View, she reminded audiences of the moments that didn't always make headlines, but shaped America's place in the world. Moments like when Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney declared that his country's friendship with the U.S. was over, or when French President Emmanuel Macron called Trump's tariffs brutal and unfounded, or when Australia's Prime Minister Anthony Albanese said those same tariffs had no basis in logic and were not the act of a friend. Even China, never shy in global disputes, accused the U.S. of blackmail under Trump's trade tactics. It wasn't disagreement, it was distancing. It wasn't rivalry, it was rejection. What's most striking isn't just that leaders criticized Trump, it's that they no longer trusted America. They stopped believing that our foreign policy could survive another election cycle. And that's the damage Sonny wanted viewers to understand. When your allies begin to treat your democracy like a gamble, the cost isn't just diplomatic, it's economic, it's strategic. It's deeply personal for every American whose job, security, or future depends on a stable global order. International partnerships aren't just photo ops, they're lifelines. Trade deals keep prices down. Military alliances keep wars from starting. Shared intelligence stops terror before it reaches the front page. And all of that begins with trust. But Trump's leadership replaced cooperation with confrontation. America First quickly turned into America Alone, and the ripple effects haven't stopped. New trade deals formed without us. Climate agreements moved on without us input. The trust that took decades to build unraveled in months. The lesson is simple, but sobering. Strength isn't measured by how loudly you shout at the world. It's measured by how many are still willing to stand beside you when the shouting stops. And while foreign leaders backed away, Trump was turning his attention to another powerful target, one that held him accountable, challenged his narratives, and refused to stay quiet: the press. And what came next wasn't just a battle over headlines. It was a battle over truth itself. In a democracy, the press isn't supposed to be a problem. It's supposed to be a safeguard, a mirror held up to power, reminding leaders that someone is always watching, always questioning. That's why the very first amendment to the U.S. Constitution guarantees freedom of the press. It's not an afterthought, it's a foundation. But under Donald Trump, that foundation cracked. Sonny Hostin, who studied journalism before law, spoke about it with a kind of protective urgency. She recalled how, during Trump's presidency, the White House broke with more than a century of precedent by restricting access to certain reporters, revoking press passes, and using press briefings as stages for public shaming. The message was clear: ask the wrong question, and you're the enemy. It wasn't just combative, it was coordinated. Trump labeled major news outlets fake news. He called reporters the enemy of the people, a phrase with a dark history, used by dictators to silence dissent. And millions of Americans heard him, believed him, and began treating the free press with suspicion and hostility. The damage wasn't just rhetorical. Journalists were heckled at rallies, threatened online, and in some cases, physically attacked. A CNN reporter was banned from the White House after challenging Trump during a press conference. Entire newsrooms faced security threats for simply doing their jobs. Sonny pointed out that when a president wages war on the truth, the consequences trickle down. Suddenly, facts become optional, expertise becomes elitism, and people start choosing their reality based on what comforts them, not what's verifiable. And that's where the danger lies, not just for journalists, but for everyone. Because when the press is weakened, so is accountability. And when accountability disappears, it's not just the headlines that get rewritten, it's the history. Maybe that's why Sonny sounded so alarmed, not as a host or a pundit, but as someone who had once believed in the power of a free press to protect democracy. When those protections fall, it's not just the truth that suffers, it's all of us. But perhaps the clearest sign of how deeply Trump distrusted checks and balances wasn't how he treated the media, it was how he chose the people around him, not for their knowledge, but for their loyalty. And in that loyalty-first culture, something far more dangerous was quietly taking shape. It began with laughter, a few sharp jokes, a mugshot punchline, and the kind of biting wit that daytime television audiences love. But by the end of Sonny Hostin's monologue, the mood had shifted, the smiles faded. What started as satire had turned into something heavier, something that lingered, because beneath the humor was a deep concern, not just for politics, but for people. Sonny wasn't just talking about Trump's scandals or Melania's silence. She was connecting the dots between leadership and real life, between one man's obsession with power and the quiet erosion of the systems meant to protect everyone else. She talked about workers losing their jobs while billionaires whined on television, about children being denied access to real history, about allies turning away, about teachers silenced, about reporters harassed. And then, in one final reflection, she brought it home. If a man who incited an insurrection can run for president, she said, then maybe we need to rethink how we treat every American who's made a mistake. It was a gut punch, because millions of people in this country are denied jobs, housing, and dignity every day because they checked a box. Convicted felon? Yet the same system that punishes them so harshly now watches, silently, as one of the most powerful men in the world escapes every consequence. Sonny didn't say it with anger. She said it with clarity. with the quiet exhaustion of someone who's seen too much, read too much, and still refuses to give up on what's right. Maybe that's the lesson we're left with. That truth doesn't always arrive with fire and fury. Sometimes it comes through a conversation at a table of women, broadcast on morning TV, and sometimes it's not the shouting that wakes us up, it's the quiet, steady voice that refuses to look away. And as Sonny's voice faded, one thing became clear: this isn't just about one man or one presidency. It's about the country we've become, the one we still have time to shape. Because if comedy can expose the cracks, maybe clarity can help us rebuild what's been lost. And that brings us to the heart of it all, where politics meets personal, and where laughter turns into reckoning. Because some truths aren't meant to be digested in headlines. They're meant to be felt and remembered in the end. This wasn't just a story about Sonny Hostin calling out Donald Trump. It was a reflection of something bigger: how power can twist truth, how silence can reveal more than words, and how a nation built on accountability must never grow numb to its erosion. From Melania's quiet rebellion to Trump's economic failures, from attacks on education and the press to the global trust that slipped away, Sonny didn't just speak, she connected the dots. She reminded us that democracy doesn't unravel all at once. It fades, one unchecked lie, one silenced voice, one forgotten value at a time. And yet, in the face of that unraveling, we still have a choice: to stay informed, to ask questions, and to demand better. If this video made you think, feel, or see something differently, we hope you'll give it a like, drop a comment, and hit that subscribe button so we can keep bringing you stories that matter. Thank you for watching, and until next time, take care, stay sharp, and stay true.